And welcome to Kunsang Pile Joling, a special series of teachings by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. This was a retreat that she gave on POA, which is the transference of consciousness at the time of death. It's a series of 8. They will be shown on Wednesdays, and we're running them both on YouTube and on Facebook, since we advertise them on both. So we're really happy to have you join us. Today is the first of the series, so it's introduction, and it's also talks about the lower realms. So with no further ado, begin.
This Sunday morning teaching is the first part of our week-long POA retreat. And so while this morning's teaching will be appropriate for those of you who are not attending POA, it is also especially made for those of you who are attending POA or who have learned POA in the past. So this will be a refresher. There are certain preliminary teachings that must be taken into account, that must be part of our menu in order to proceed into a deeper level of practice. And traditionally on our path, on the Buddhist path, these teachings are often heard again and again and again. It's kind of interesting the way it happens. It will seem as though you will have absorbed and taken in certain preliminary teachings well enough to know them and recognize them. But the student will also notice that upon getting ready to take on another deeper and more profound level of teaching or level of practice, they will always be given, at least in a condensed form, those same preliminary teachings again and again. And this is completely necessary because in order to ready oneself for deeper levels of practice, in order to sort of tenderize the mind, soften the mind, and prepare the mind in the same way that one plows a field in order to prepare it to receive a seed, we have to prepare our minds and we have to think in a certain logical pathway in order to proceed to these deeper levels of teachings. The thought behind that is that the deeper levels of teachings, and particularly the practice, will have no context if we don't go through these certain preliminary ideas, certain preliminary passages before we go further. Without context, there will be no deep understanding. In order for Dharma to be appropriate for the student has to have accomplished what we call turning the mind toward Dharma. Turning the mind toward Dharma means actually that we have stood back, in a sense, from our lives in order to gain some perspective with the help of someone who has before us stood back from their lives in order to gain some perspective. And having stood back from our lives, we are able to look at cyclic existence. We are able to see our position in cyclic existence. We are able to see the situation of other sentient beings in cyclic existence. And having viewed all of that, we are able to understand then the problems associated with cyclic existence, literally the faults of cyclic existence. And then, and only then, are we capable of turning away from cyclic existence. Literally, it is somewhat like a love affair in the sense that we are infatuated with cyclic existence. Cyclic existence tricks us into showing us bright, shiny, feel-good things that cause us to react in a characteristic way, in the same way a new love affair would bring us a new toy to play with, something bright and shiny in our lives, something that we can say, things are not so bad, I have that. You know, and that's kind of how we think as human beings, we need a toy to play with. And for a very long time we become playful in samsara. We become thinking of samsara as a toy, much as a child would with a bright and shiny object. And in the same way that we do not always think our intimate love relationships through to the end, very rarely in fact, do we think samsara through to the end. And so we are in love in a stupid, childlike way, an unthinking way, an idiot way with samsara, in the same way that many of our love affairs and our infatuations that we have engaged in have been kind of stupid and unthinking and basically guided by bright lights or who knows what. We have no idea what makes us fall into the situations that we fall into. So at any rate, we have to address this problem of being in love with cyclic existence without being able to see what cyclic existence actually is. We cannot see its faults. In the same way, in a new relationship, if someone, an outsider who is knowledgeable, were to point out the fault of the relationship that one were engaged in, and even point out the fault of the beloved, and most of all, point out the fault of the interaction between oneself and the beloved, of course you would not accept that information. You would reject, in fact you would kill the message bearer, literally. You would kill the message bearer in your mind. You would toss that out and that would be the end of it. So we have that kind of a situation in our lives, and it causes us to revolve in cyclic existence endlessly, unthinkingly, in a kind of rapture, kind of stupid-like, in a daze. We also say that an appropriate way to understand our relationship with samsara is to think that we are drunk, that literally samsara is like a drug, like a narcotic. It dupes us in the same way that narcotics do. Narcotics cause us to not be aware of the pain. The same situation's going on, but we're not aware of the pain. If we think of having surgery, or something like that, with taking in first barbiturates and then other kind of drugs in order to make that surgery less painful or to make it possible. Our relationship with samsara is very much like that. You may be asleep and you may not know that you are feeling the pain, but actually the way barbiturates work, in fact you are feeling the pain, but it's blocked off from the part of your brain that registers that in a way where you can react to it. So in fact you are feeling the pain, and in fact you are under the knife, surgically you are being cut open, your parts are laying out on the table. But to you, that's not an uncomfortable experience. In fact, surgery seems quite a wonderful thing because you go to sleep and you wake up and it's all finished. You weren't there, neat and clean. You have no idea whether you had respiratory arrest or cardiac arrest or ingrown toenails or any of your teeth fell out. You have no idea what happened to you while you're on that table. And that's because of the influence of the narcotics. The narcotics makes us approach things that can be not only detrimental to our health and well-being, but could literally kill us, can make us even approach our own death with a calm mind. But a calm mind, not in a smart way. A calm mind would be literally a prepared mind, ready to go through a door that we have rehearsed going through, and we know how to go through. In this way, we are a drunk mind, a mind that is incapable of feeling anything besides the kind of delusion and calm that goes with narcotics. And that's how our relationship with samsara is right now. Even though we may have practiced some preliminary practice and received some preliminary teaching, still the delusion hangs on. And we have one of the things that are characteristic of samsaric beings, the beings that are caught in the wheel of death and rebirth, that's everyone here. Samsaric beings tend to kind of fall into a stupor, a stupor, S-T-U, I wish you'd fall into a stupor. A stupor, how does that word spell? S-T-U-P-O-R, stupor. So we fall into a stupor, and we fall into a stupor about every 30 seconds or so. we can be temporarily reminded, and those of you that are practicing Ngundro, which are actually those very preliminary teachings that we are going to discuss today, will notice that you can practice Ngundro, meaning that you can read those lines, turning the mind toward Dharma. Let me see, I'm reading them so carefully. So what happens here is that repeatedly we are falling into the same stupor. We lose it. We just constantly lose it. And so if I were to say to you now, okay, you've finished your preliminary practice and you've accomplished your Ngundro for today, so now we are going to go into Poa practice, and you have to organize your mind and your thinking and direct yourself so that you understand very clearly why we should practice Poa, how Poa is suitable for you, and why it is necessary to put so much effort into this one particular practice. The student who is not reminded in the traditional way how to approach these teachings, even though they have just been practicing their Ngundro, will literally forget. Or have that other wonderful, remarkable trait that samsaric beings have, which is to be able to literally repeat the text back to the teacher and say, this is why, da-da, 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 da-da. And they give you back exactly what they have just read. But nothing is happening. Those words are somehow coming out the mouth, not going in the brain. They are simply not being internalized. And that's another kind of stupor that we fall into. So therefore, in order to have the best result from our teaching, from our Poa retreat this week, and in order to keep in tune and in harmony with the way that teachings are traditionally taught, we will cover and recover some of the most fundamental traditional teachings in order to prepare ourselves, but we will do this in a condensed form and almost kind of conversationally, because I have found that Westerners that have the intention of absorbing a practice in order to utilize it in their everyday lives, in order to mesh it into their everyday lives, respond better to being taught conversationally, to being spoken to in a way that they are normally spoken to, not in a strange and archaic way. Then they are able to knit things together much better. So that's the way that we will approach our teaching for today, and it will be useful for those of you who are not intending to pursue Poa. For those of you that are curious about what Poa may be, Poa is actually the science and the how-to, the traditional Buddhist teaching, the Buddhist view on death and dying. It is literally how to die. The Vajrayana path, which is the path that we are on, is a subsection of the Mahayana path, which is one of the many ways in which the Buddha has taught. In the Vajrayana path, it is considered that our path, the Vajrayana path, is the only way that one can achieve liberation within one lifetime. That with using any of the Buddhist teachings, one can surely attain liberation, but in Vajrayana, one can attain liberation within the course of one lifetime. Now we have to look at that from the point of view of realism. Because what does that mean for us? If we are to approach Dharma in the way that we are approaching now, which means we are approaching it very casually, very gently, very much without pressure, very much kind of interested in it, but no big deal. If we are to approach Dharma in a way as to hope that it will be convenient in order to fit into our lives, then of course there can be not much hope for the kind of extraordinary result of liberation in this lifetime. Because the effort, literally what we put into our attainment, will equal what we get out of it. And if we are casual, haphazard, no big deal about our practice, the result will be, of course, not stunning, not unusual, but casual. Not thorough and completely accomplished, but pretty much there, kind of. And that's the way that our result will be. But of course, when we are talking about Buddhahood, when we are talking about liberation in one body, we are talking then about the most supreme result, the ultimate result, the result, you could say it is the ultimate gift that keeps on giving, in the sense that having attained liberation, one need not move through the same kinds of passages that an ordinary samsaric being moves through. While one may take on the appearance of some passages as that, one is not literally stuck like a fly in glue, the way ordinary sentient beings are stuck in samsara. One will only demonstrate those characteristics, habits, and appearances that will relate to those sentient beings that they are trying to help, and one will engage in those for the sake of sentient beings. So the result is different, you see. The difference is like, if one were to attain liberation, one would be like a non-smoker who spent, 85 years in the room with other people who smoke. There will be some inhalation, but one will be simply, you also have to consider that this non-smoker is extremely genetically healthy, set up differently than the others, so that upon taking in the smoke, there may be some effect in that it's not the optimum environment. One might feel tired, not as energetic as if one were getting the oxygen that one would want. You see what I'm saying? I'm playing out this analogy so that you can understand a difference that is literally inexplicable. But perhaps you can understand it in a common way. Now, the person who is an ordinary samsaric being would be one of those smokers. So the ordinary samsaric being would come out of that situation afflicted, you see. They would be the ones that were smoking, taking on the smoke, taking in the smoke, inhaling deeply, having ordinary genetic, physical setup, and very little with which to resist the horrible sentence that we are laying on ourselves. But the one who has attained liberation would be the non-smoker who is in that room for a period of time with some margin of safety. That non-smoker will come out of the room smelling like a smoker, but they will not be a smoker, and the result will not be the same. But the samsaric being will come out of that room with the result of that kind of smoking. So you see the analogy that I'm trying to create for you. It's not that that all enlightened beings literally sit on cushions and float around in the air doing high and wonderful things that none of us can explain. It isn't like that. It's that each of us attains liberation, and upon attaining liberation, if that liberation is a true liberation and has within it the awakening of the bodhicitta, which true liberation must have, then one would return for the sake of sentient beings, and one would appear as sentient beings for the sake of the understanding of sentient beings. So, in order to prepare our minds for this sort of extraordinary result, we have to first think in our minds that we want that extraordinary result. To backtrack, those of you that are hearing teachings like this particular teaching, this poa, those of you that have accomplished poa practice and have actually had the physical signs that go with it, you must understand that this is a practice that could literally, if truly practiced and truly adhered to at the time of death, could change the course, will change the course, if it is practiced purely at the time of death, of your entire experience as an individual being to date. Literally, it would be like running down a very long journey and running, only relying on your own two legs and your whole body. And then suddenly you meet up with kind of a greased pole, and you find a way through instruction to run into that pole, make yourself go vroom, 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 around that pole and spin off much faster and in a completely different direction than you're going in right now, having more than your own steam as an individual to go with. It's a little bit like that, and sometimes can be even more dramatic. because there truly is liberation in the Bardo state for the practitioner that has sincerely and in a dedicated way practiced for that moment, to the degree that one can return simply from that as a Nirmanakaya form, that is to say, a physical emanation form of the Buddha in order to benefit sentient beings. One would come back in a way that one would be able to rescue sentient beings. So this is literally possible with this practice. This practice is the practice that makes it realistic for us to say in this modern time, 1995, that it is literally possible to attain liberation in one lifetime. See, most of us are not going to have caves to go retreat in. And most of us are not going to be able to get off the hook about supporting ourselves. We have to remain engaged in the world. We have to do that. Also, we've taken on other responsibilities. We have families that we wish to support and other projects that we are engaged in that, are important projects and they are part of our lives. So many of us will not have the kind of opportunity that it would take to practice unceasingly in order for us to attain liberation in this lifetime other than through the POA. Now, if you're one of those lucky people who is about to embark on a journey to either a monastery in India or a monastery in Tibet where you can study the texts and receive the teachings that we as Americans literally cannot receive because they have not been translated or they are not available in this country. If you are one of those fortunate people that can go and do that, and you will learn to practice by studying Tibetan, and you will literally become a Tibetan in that environment, even though you will be an American, you will completely change your life into that face. If you are able to do that, perhaps it's not so important for you to study POA right now. Of course, that's assuming that you live long enough to complete all of your practices. There are a lot of assumptions we're counting on here, aren't there? So at any rate, if you're one of those people, then you may not need to practice POA in order to attain liberation in that lifetime. We are also assuming that you have the karmic setup and that you're wired, literally, in order to be able to achieve liberation in this lifetime. Because it is also the case that there are people who can come into contact with the entire volume of what is available. Every single essential pith teaching, every single possible cause for realization, that we are able to come into contact with such things, and literally they cannot go in. The intake button is broken, the student cannot hear it, and eventually, because they cannot hear it, they will leave Dharma, they will go away from it, they will have to go away from it, because they cannot stand to be in that presence karmically, or they are not prepared for to be in the presence of such teaching, of such potent teaching. They will remove themselves. They will simply remove themselves. That's simply how it is. So, all of these things being the case, it sounds reasonable and sensible, does it not, to practice POA in order to take advantage of the most extraordinary opportunity in order to achieve the result at a time that seems reasonable to us. It does not seem reasonable to us to practice now for a result that may not ripen for another 1,000 years, our time. 10,000 years, our time. For we're not motivated for that, but we can understand the positive result of practicing in order to achieve liberation in one lifetime. Now, in order to be qualified to have these teachings, there are two things that must happen. First of all, we must establish the proper motivation. And once again, this is something we hear about again and again and again. How many flavors can ice cream come in? But this proper motivation absolutely makes it possible for you to receive the teaching. With no proper motivation, the teaching is very much like seed falling on stone. It will not take root, it will not blossom, there will be no result, through no fault of the seed, but through the fault of the ground on which the seed is placed. So having the proper motivation is of the utmost importance, and for that reason, I want to take some time to explain. According to the Buddha's teaching, our own nature is not inconsistent with the bodhicitta, or what we call the great compassion. The bodhicitta is actually the true nature of our mind in its emanation or display form. So you can consider that our nature is, in a non-dual way, wisdom or emptiness, and method or bodhicitta, compassion. These things are our nature. The way that our language works is because of the way our dualistic thinking works. We have to mention emptiness as being separate from method. We have to mention wisdom as being separate from bodhicitta, because of the way our minds work, because of our internal separation, because of our delusion, our belief in the separation between self and other, between subjective and objective. But in truth, that primordial wisdom nature, which is emptiness, which is wisdom, is inseparable from that which is method, from that which is the display, bodhicitta, or compassion. And it is inseparable in the same way that on a coin, one side is inseparable from the other. You cannot use a coin without using both sides. You cannot take a coin in your hand without using both sides. You see, these are inseparable. They are non-dual. They are indistinguishable from one another. And yet, typical of our delusion and indicative of our delusion, we make distinction between that is in truth not distinguishable. That being the case, it is not foreign to our nature, and it is also not separate from the goal that we wish to achieve by practicing in this way, for us to give rise to the great bodhicitta, or the great compassion. And the way that that is done on the Buddhist path is to consider that our own goals and the goals of sentient beings are indistinguishable, that they are non-dual. That is to say, that our goal to practice in order to achieve liberation is inseparable from the goal of sentient beings. They also have the goal of practicing in order to achieve liberation. Not all of them know it, in the same way that some of you don't know it either. You may think you know it, or you may know that you don't know it. But many of you are still at the party, not growing out of the party, not grown up, and looking back and saying, oh, that won't do me much good. You remember that situation that you found yourself in as you were growing up. When you were a young person, you had a few knock-down, drag-out parties, didn't you? I mean the kind where, at some point in your life, you probably got drunk. No, nobody makes a sound like, oh, drunk? What's drunk? At some point in your life, you probably were out of control, just party down, not thinking straight, doing things that were compulsive and obsessive and not appropriate and not healthy for you, not good for your well-being, unthinking, deluded things. This is something that we have all experienced, but particularly in the case of when we were younger, we would party hardy. And if you think about it, if any of you have done that, and I'm sure that perhaps one or two of you have, you may remember that once you partied hardy, there was a period of regret afterward. And that was primarily the next day. And there, of course, how shall I say, the cure for that is, of course, prostration to the porcelain god. And with all of that, one comes to understand that one is literally destroying oneself, that there is no hope for happiness from doing that to oneself. After doing that repeatedly, we tend to grow up after a while. And we tend to be unwilling to put ourselves through that kind of stuff again. Well, that happens to us spiritually, too. We go through the same compulsive, obsessive behavior with no good result. And at some point, either through our own good fortune, through our own gathering together of merit, which causes literally a kind of smarts arising in the mind, or through the instruction of our teacher, we can begin to realize that what we are doing makes no sense. It simply makes no sense. It is destructive, it is painful, and it is not pleasant. And so that is the stage in which we find ourselves turning our mind towards Dharma. What we have to realize in order to give rise to the compassion to the great bodhicitta, is that this is true of all of us, not just you. If you have come to this realization that it's time to turn the mind toward Dharma, then what of those who have not yet come to that realization? They are still putting themselves through that. They are still acting in a destructive way that disintegrates their spiritual strength. They are acting in such a way that literally brings them suffering. What of them? Perhaps you have heard the good word, but what of them? Who will help them? And so we develop a sense of compassion. And another thing that happens is that as we are turning the mind toward Dharma, we literally begin to examine the condition of cyclic existence. Literally examine the condition of cyclic existence. And we come to understand that we are not the only ones that are wandering in cyclic existence, that all sentient beings that we see, of all types, not even only counting those that are human, but also there are animal sentient beings and sentient beings that live in other realms. And these too are wandering aimlessly and are suffering. And so we begin to develop a sense of empathy through examination. Now some people might think, gee, what a downer. Why would you want to examine the suffering of others? Better to close one's eyes and think happy thoughts. There is a time and place for closing one's eyes and thinking of happy thoughts. There is a time for joy and a time for happiness. And the kind of joy and happiness that is healthful and that increases our ability to attain liberation and to have happiness is the kind of joy that is not the same as suppression of information. It is the kind of joy that is not the same as closing one's eyes and being blind to cause and effect relationships. It is an all-pervasive, natural kind of joy and is the very display of our nature. That joy promotes health and well-being, promotes longevity, and it is born of moral and ethical and compassionate conduct. The kind of joy that we are trying to give ourselves when we try to fake it, literally fake it through our lives, ignoring all the bad news and just playing the way children play in a sandbox, picking and choosing what we want to think about and what we want to see. That is a joy that is an artificial recipe. It is a joy that exists in the same world with suppression, ignorance, and lack of information. And that joy is not healthy for us. It does not promote longevity. It does not promote happiness. It is literally like, let's say we were to take all the chairs that are in this room and distribute them throughout the room in the haphazard way, and then pile in a few more pieces of furniture. Pull down, wait till it's pitch black midnight, turn off all the lights, close all the curtains till it's absolutely pitch dark in this room. And then try to negotiate going through this room. Would you rather negotiate going through this room, just trying to feel your way through with all of this furniture upturned and barricaded and brought up and in your way and that sort of thing? Would you like to go through the room, getting from this door to that door, and let's imagine that that door is the ultimate door, the one we need to get out of. We must get out of that door for whatever reason. Would you like to go from that door to that door with the lights off or with the lights on? I don't know about you, but I'm a sensible, practical kind of girl. And if I have to make a journey, I want to know the facts. I want to go with the lights on. I want to turn the lights on so that I can walk around the furniture, go under it, step over it, do whatever it takes to negotiate this scary passage through samsara. It makes no sense to close the eyes and not take in information and pretend, suppress the facts in order to go from one place to another, because you will surely fail. You will surely hurt yourself and have a very painful journey in the process. So for this reason, we must examine cyclic existence. We must examine the condition of sentient beings, and we must examine our own condition in order to truly turn our minds toward Dharma. Literally, what will happen at that time is once we have seen the faults of cyclic existence and seen the good result of understanding of growing in understanding, and the joyfulness of virtuous and moral and ethical conduct and compassion. Once we have seen that, we will develop the habit of wanting to know, of opening the mind, of having the mind be very much like a bowl, a very pure thing in which nectar can be poured. And we will crave information, we will crave practice, we will literally crave turning on the lights so that we can understand. If we do not crave that now, if we wish to remain in ignorance and darkness because it is easier or because we like being drunk, it is simply because it is our habit to do so. And that does not excuse us from the need to change. Develop a new habit. You can see that that young person who parties down and worships the porcelain god every weekend, every morning, and literally is watching their well-being go down. We on the outside can see that that needs to change, but that person, in the flux of their own ignorance, cannot see that that needs to change. So these things I am pointing out to you so that you can make new and acceptable decisions in your lifetime, so that you can actually turn the mind toward Dharma. In order to practice effectively, then, we have to give rise to the great bodhicitta. We have to see the needs of sentient beings, what their situation is, what their condition is. And for that reason, I'm going to talk, first of all, about the 6 realms of cyclic existence. These are the different types of reality that one may experience during the bardo, or passage of living. We are beginning then with the passage or bardo of living. The bardo is not actually a time period. You can't say that bardo is a period from Thursday to Thursday, or from the 24th to the 3rd of the month. Bardo is not a marking time or a markable time. It is perceived that way because of our delusion. We will see the bardo of the passage through our lives as being, whatever it is, let's say 75 years. So we can see this as a passage, from the point of realization, this is a movement, a display, a passage, a color. It is something other than the way we experience it. But we experience it as the date that we were born, and the date that we die, and time in between. But in fact, what we are actually experiencing is not a length of time, but rather we are experiencing the bardo, or passage of living. According to the teachings on the bardo, or passage of living, we're not the only ones here. What a big surprise. And now everybody's thinking, oh great, she's going to tell us about flying saucers, and I wish I'm still waiting for them to come pick me up. I don't know if any of that stuff's true. I'm definitely a Trekkie, and I'm into Star Trek, and I hope to heck it's true. And it seems logical to me that it's true, there being so many planets out there. But I don't know that for sure. What we're going to talk about today is the honest to goodness, this is what the Buddha has taught us about the realms of cyclic existence. According to the Buddha's teaching, the amount of those sentient beings who can achieve rebirth as a human being, the amount of human beings are so small that if we could think that it would be like the amount of particles of sand, or particles of dust, we should say, on our thumbnail, compared to those sentient beings that are not human beings. And that would be comparable to the particles of dust on the earth. Are you perceiving the vast amount of difference? So we have to think of ourselves as the smallest group, really. That there are other sentient beings who are revolving in cyclic existence, but in what way? This is what we want to know. But there are so many of them. What are their sufferings? What are their conditions? How can we help them? And should we consider them? What are they to us? And these are the thoughts that will help us to understand how to understand our condition and the condition of sentient beings. According to the Buddhist teaching, there are actually 3,000 myriads of universes. 3,000 myriads of universes. That is a way of saying uncountable reality. Uncountable, unmentionable, unthinkable display. So much display as to be inconceivable to the kind of mind we have that likes to count beans or likes to count numbers. There are that many wandering in cyclic existence. And according to the Buddha, there are basically 6 realms of cyclic existence. And I will talk about these 6 realms of cyclic existence briefly so that each one of us can understand the condition of cyclic existence and the result of our own actions. Because none of these sentient beings in cyclic existence have ended up where they are, including us, through anything else other than by the result of our own actions. You are here listening to Dharma teaching because somewhere in the past you have been exemplary. Exemplary. You have, oh, now suddenly the room gets quiet. They want to hear about this. Don't you love it? Every time. This is so predictable. All right, let me tell you how wonderful you are. In order to have received the teachings that may ultimately result in your liberation in one lifetime, and you talk about grains of dust on a thumbnail, that would be equal to grains of dust on the head of a pin. That is how rare this opportunity is. And you must have done some extraordinary things in your past in order to be able to hear this teaching. You must have been kind to sentient beings. You must have helped other sentient beings or supported them as they sought truth, just as you are being supported in your search for truth. You must have been helpful. You must have been seeking. You must have been looking for a better way. You must have had some devotion. You must have had some faith. And more. It would take extraordinary kindness, extraordinary virtue to come to this point. Now, within this point, there are people within this room, and you could see some of the people in this room are sleepy, and they can't listen very well, and they sort of miss most things. Well, why is that? That is not because of what they had for breakfast, really. Not because, unless, of course, you had a candy bar for breakfast, in which case, go back to sleep. It is not because of, their hearing. It is not because they speak a different language. It is not because of any of the things that you might think are contributing factors. If the person is too dulled out to be able to hear the teaching, it is because while they have the extraordinary merit and virtue to be able to hear the teaching, they don't have quite enough to be able to absorb it deeply. It's a little bit like if you could imagine a bug crawling on the arm of a great Lhama or crawling on the arm of the Buddha. I mean, that's a pretty good position to be in. I mean, if you're a bug, that's where you want to be, crawling on the arm of the Buddha. I certainly, if I were a bug, that's where I would want to be, in the Buddha's armpit or, someplace safe. But the Buddha could be giving the most extraordinary teachings. The bug won't hear it. The bug won't accept it, and the bug certainly won't like it. The bug just wants to be the bug on the Buddha's arm. Doesn't even know it's on the Buddha's arm, really. Just wants to be comfortable, you see? So you may wish to be comfortable. You may wish to take a nap. You may wish to think about the things that you're used to thinking about. You may wish to keep the same exact attitudes that you've always had. So this way you don't have to change. But that's because, even though that all seems very logical to you, actually that's because you don't quite have enough merit to absorb the teachings deeply. Everything is due to cause and effect. So of course we must look now at absorbing more merit. Now we have to look with that information, we have to look at the condition of sentient beings. How much worse is their condition? According to the Buddha's teaching, there are the 6 realms of cyclic existence, and I will begin with what is called the lowest of the realms. Now, generally when Westerners hear about the different realms, particularly, we love the high realms. Those are our favorites. But the lower realms, the ones that scare us a bit, Westerners don't want to hear this because they associate it with something archaic that their mothers told them or that their old preachers told them sometime in the past. Every world religion has a story about a result that will occur if one engages in a lifelong non-virtue, or even in temporary periods of non-virtue. Every single world religion that has the kind of strength to have lasted through fads and trends and teachers that say they have it and then they drop dead just like everybody else and there's no good result. You know, every world religion has a teaching about this result from non-virtuous behavior. So for those of you that are uncomfortable with this, I'm sorry. Here's what you need to do. Get out of it. Get out of cyclic existence. That's the point. That's why we're having this teaching. If you don't like the idea of the result of your non-virtue, don't commit it. If you don't like the idea of sinking to a lower realm or experiencing any of those lower realms, create the causes for not sinking to a lower realm. And here's how. But first, let's learn about them. Again, here we're walking through a room with the lights turned on. You want the light on so that you can get around it. The difference with the Buddha's teaching is that we are taught a method to avoid this. We are taught a method to purify it. There is method. There is long-term method that is geared for a certain result, like the ability to turn the light on. Of the 6 realms, the realm that we will speak of first is the rebirth in the hell realm. There are many sentient beings that are, even now, even as we speak, revolving helplessly in the hell realms. I say hell realms because it isn't, I guess the Christian idea of hell is a place under the earth where things are burning. That is not the idea that we have here. The hell realms are varied. They are varied in their condition. There are, in fact, extremely hot hell realms. And there are Dharma texts, and they are within our bookstore. I don't feel the need to go into that at any great length at this time because that isn't technically what we are about at this time. I'm going into this in a condensed form. But there are the hot hell realms. And the hot hell realms are associated, they are a result that is associated with the cause of hatred, extreme hatred. The kind of virulent hatred and attitudinal hatred that many people allow to remain in their minds. A perfect example of that kind of hatred would be the Ku Klux Klan kind of mentality, you see, or the Hitler kind of mentality, the kind of mentality in which one is just hatred simply pours out of the pores. There is such a strong habitual tendency of hatred. It simply is unconditional negative hatred instead of unconditional positive regard. You know, it is habitual, it is constant, it is simply an outpouring of hatred. This is associated with the cause of truly torturing and hurting others, and there have been many throughout time who have tortured and mutilated the bodies and lives of others in a horrible way that we, living sort of middle America lives, really can't imagine except through what we've read in the paper. We hear a little bit about maniacs that do terrible things, but we don't understand that level of hatred. Yet that level of hatred can result in the very lowest and most horrible of the burning hells. There are also of course not exclusively either, there are other certain heinous sins that also result in the rebirth and the most difficult of the hells. And those heinous sins are the murdering or killing of one's mother and father, the murdering or killing or harming of one's guru, the murdering or killing or harming or drawing blood of a bodhisattva. That's not to say that if you were taking a blood sample for the health of the bodhisattva, that if you were to draw blood, well, you know, people would not exactly be standing in line for that job, would they? No, that would be intentional harm, like really harming a bodhisattva, someone who could bring enlightenment to others. Harming or taking that one out of the world is considered to be a heinous crime because it actually literally changes the how can I say it, the future of the world. It changes the world in a negative way, prevents the world from moving forward in its evolution, in its continuum. So for extraordinary non-virtues, for those really extraordinary sins, there are the hell realms consisting of the extremely hot hell realms, the extremely cold hell realms. And characteristic of both the hot and cold hell realms is that there is no respite from the suffering. There is no respite from the suffering. Literally, in the cold realm, when one takes rebirth in the cold realm, one will be reborn in inconceivable cold with no protective clothing. What will happen to oneself will be the experience of what we think would happen to ourselves if we were to be suddenly now naked in an extremely cold realm. That is to say, the skin would freeze, crack open, things would happen strangely to our bodies, and you would think that that would be the end of it. But in the very cold hell realms, until the non-virtuous karma is exhausted, one continues to reappear even after death from cold has occurred. And that is the same with the hot realms. Continuous reappearance, there's no respite. There are other forms. There are the individual hells, and I can tell you for a fact that I know through my own perception that this is true. I have seen this sort of thing, and this is the kind of thing that people mistake as being ghosts. You know, often you go to a house and you hear that there is a certain time of the night you'll hear footsteps, or you'll hear a door creaking, or you hear chains rattling, or whatever it is people say that hear, whoa, you know, that sort of thing. Probably what has happened there, although not exclusively, but probably what has happened there is that there is a sentient being stuck in an individual hell realm. This is a hell realm that is individual to the person's experience. Whatever their expected experience is, and it's according to the content of their mind streams, their consciousness, their habitual tendency. Write that word down somewhere in your notes or remember it. Habitual tendency. That will come up again and again during the course of your practice as a Buddhist. Due to the force of their habitual tendency, they will remain. And this kind of hell realm is the result of, again, extreme non-virtue, but it is also a non-virtue that is mixed with ignorance and a determination to remain ignorant. Think about that, because you have done this. Think about this now. The determination to remain ignorant is the one where you make a decision to go away from pursuing wisdom and pursuing your method, your path. And you just go, it's too hard, I don't like this, it's not easy for me, I don't want it, it's hard, and I'm just a little kid, and I have to go play some more. So when you do that, you're actually turning your mind away from Dharma, and you are committing a very strong non-virtue. And the other one is, I don't have to learn that. I know enough to get by. I'll just read, let's see, who was that one that wrote about death and dying, non-Buddhist? They wrote about that you see a tunnel and you see a white light. Do you remember who that was? That's it. I'll just read Ross's book and I'll be fine. Maybe I'll read it if I have time. But I really like to read other books better. And this kind of thing, you have this kind of idea. Or sometimes, and I'll see this in class, I'll see a person in class with attitude written all over their heads. And have no idea why they're here. Why did they come? I don't know, but they have attitude written all over their heads. And the attitude is actually like putting yourself in chains, because you are absolutely setting up that you are not going to have a positive rebirth. If you could sit in the presence of what could possibly be your own root guru, or at least a guru, a teacher, and just simply turn your mind. Literally what you would be doing there is to make your mind like a bowl filled with poison. So the milk that pours in there is tainted, and then you are responsible for tainting the milk within your own mind. So that kind of thing is the kind of thing that leads to rebirth in the individual hells. That kind of ignorance, that is an ignorant move to make. It is born of ignorance. The individual hells are very strange, very unusual. I can describe a couple that I know of personally. One good example would be of an individual who is somehow reborn in a very, their appearance to themselves, of course this is all relative, and it is all a deluded perception. And they perceive themselves to be stuck in the opening and closing of a door. And this is the kind of person that perhaps would remain stagnant within the course of their lives, locked themselves in, did not grow, would not challenge themselves to go the extra mile and be kind towards others, remained extremely self-absorbed, literally shut their eyes during the course of life. Again, that sounds pretty mild. In terms of a sin, that you could commit worse sins, but we're talking about sins against one's own nature. And those are important. Those are very important. So, or so should they, sins against one's own nature, pointing here. So this person would be stuck in the opening and closing of a door and would experience the door being closed on them and would experience the door being opened again. Would experience it as though their bodies were literally stuck in that again and again. I have also seen sentient beings that are literally stuck walking up and down a hall. That's it. Walking up and down the hall. They are stuck calling for someone. Literally, they go through Bardo, and this will make sense for those of you that are taking the teachings. They will go through the Bardo state. They will go through the experience of the white bodhicitta, the experience of the red bodhicitta. They will go through the experience of the clear, the appearance of the Dharmadhatu that is experienced as blackness. They will go through the reawakening, the perception of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They will go through the reawakening, the perception of the wrathful deities, and then they will enter into the bardo of becoming. And in the bardo of becoming, they will immediately experience rebirth, and it will be very disconcerting because suddenly they will be walking up and down a hall trying to reach the others that they were so attached to. Those of you that have very strong attachments on a human level, try to imagine what this would feel like. They will continually try to reach out for the others, and they will sort of see them, but sort of not see them because they're not really there. Try to imagine seeking the safety of a loved one, and it changes all the time. You don't understand. That's the kind of experience that someone in the bardo of, in an individual bardo may experience, walking up and down the hall, literally, almost seeing safety, and then feeling all of the feelings that would go with doing that endlessly. So that is the kind of experience that one might experience if one were to engage in a non-virtuous life and not to practice Dharma, and it happens. Of course, now what we're talking about today, once again, is the antidote. And that is the purpose of talking about the disease, is so that we can explore the antidote. But the antidote cannot be taken without an understanding of the disease. These kinds of life forms will also be registered from our point of view. They will seem like repetitive ghosts doing the same kinds of things again and again and again. So there are many different kinds of hell. There are hells of entrapment. There are hells of destruction, in which one is literally cut up and then reassembled, and all kinds of things. And they go according to the level of non-virtue that one has committed. Compared to the amount of sentient beings that are now physical as humans, the amount of sentient beings locked in those hells is inconceivably more. We cannot understand how many more beings are locked there than are at now approaching awakening on the physical human level, listening to Dharma. We cannot imagine how many of those there are. In the hell realms, there are also many different kinds of, sometimes as one finishes the karma that has brought them to a lower hell realm, they will sometimes then go on to a higher hell realm, which is less uncomfortable. And what we're talking about is playing out the grosser and heavier non-virtues, and then cleaning up the more subtle and more lightweight non-virtues. One may graduate from one experience in the hells to the other. The next of the realms of cyclic existence. Oh, and let me ask you a question. You may think, well, that's inconceivable to me. I can't understand that. Being stuck in a door jam? No way. Hell no. Being, frozen? No. Hell no. Frozen? Burned up? No. Come on. That doesn't sound realistic to me. I can't believe in that. Well, let me ask you if you've ever had a nightmare. Who has had a nightmare? Will you raise your hand if you have ever in your life had a nightmare? Just pretty much everybody. That means that your mind has the capacity to manufacture a hell. So for you to say that there is no such thing and you'll never end up there after you've had a nightmare goes to show that you're not thinking. Because if you can manufacture a nightmare realm, that is not different from manufacturing a hell realm. It is the same thing. The seed, the content, the potential is within the mind stream, and it is due to non-virtue. That's what it is. So you know that that's possible. You have been there in a very small way. When you have a nightmare, you literally are, in a subtle way, reborn from the bardo of dreaming into this bardo of experience, which is also part of the bardo of dreaming, but you are kind of reborn from one subtle element, one subtle level to another. And this is the very same thing that happens in a much grosser and denser level for that person who is unprepared for death, which fortunately is not going to be you, right? Good. The next of the lower realms is the realm of the hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts actually have a traditional appearance, and they are described in this way. But again, you must understand that this is us looking with our eyes that are born having to distinguish between subjective and objective. These are the eyes that are born in the realm of duality. So keep that in mind when the description is given. The description is that of beings that have very, very, very tiny mouths. They are said to be about the size of a pin, just a tiny opening, and great big stomachs. And these stomachs are empty. They're not able to take in the amount of nourishment that they need. This is the picture that we are given. The reality of the realm of the hungry ghosts is that they experience extreme need, extreme hunger, beyond what you feel when you have a Big Mac attack. Way beyond that. We are talking hunger like you have never felt. It is a different color of hunger entirely. Have you been real hungry? Have you never been real hungry in your life? I've been real hungry in my life. I've been real hungry in my life. And I remember how that felt. I remember being so hungry once that I could feel my blood sugar doing wacko things, and I actually felt myself have a feeling of panic. If that hungry that you feel panicky because your body is just telling you, I need food now. So you imagine that there's that kind of hunger with that kind of panic and need times more than you can ever imagine. That would be the feeling of a hungry ghost. It is extremely needful. Now you say to yourself, please, I worked out my whole life, and for me to be reborn with a tiny little mouth and a big belly like that, no, that definitely is not going to happen to me. And so you think that that's not going to happen. Well, you have to examine yourself from a different and more subtle point of view. Let me ask you if you have ever gone through a period in your life when you were extremely needy. Oh no, not me, right? Extremely needy? I know. For women, that happens at least once a month, right? Do you love me? And for men, I think it happens about every 48 hours. But they get needy in a different way, but it's basically also, do you love me? So we have within our mind stream the potential for tremendous neediness and graspiness. Okay, this is a little bit less painful. Have you known a person in your lifetime that was compulsively, neurotically, unsatisfiably needy. Have you known a person like that? Haven't you had from that person the feeling that this hole is just too darn big to fill? I mean, you feel like you're throwing it in and throwing it in and throwing it in and trying to love and trying to give them something, and they're still whining, you know? And it never ends, and you spend the rest of your life doing this, and nothing happens. The hole never fills up. Well, that is the kind of cause that results in a rebirth as a hungry ghost. A person whose habitual tendency is simply wrapped around self-absorption and what they need. I need, gimme, 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 gimme. They see every other being in their lives as a prop by which they can achieve satisfaction. And they use people as props in order to achieve satisfaction. You know, we've all gone through periods in our life when we've done that, haven't we? Absolutely. We have used other people for our own satisfaction. Absolutely. And for many of us, we made careers out of it. Right? And maybe still. We have seen how people can wrap their whole lives around graspiness and neediness, and every time they meet with somebody, it's like, you can hear the suction. I mean, you can just hear it. You feel like the blood is coming out of your pores, just like, and that's the kind of person that you instinctively stay away from, because literally you can feel your energy being sucked into them. Haven't you felt that kind of thing? You can feel the energy being sucked into them, and it's true. If you could see it with different eyes, your energy would be sucked into them. That's true. That kind of cause, that kind of habitual tendency that the person might experience, or if it's you might experience, would result in rebirth as a hungry ghost. Particularly also, it is the kind of person who is against and has no compatibility with compassion and generosity. The person who is chronically, without hesitation, selfish to the bone. Now you may think, are there really people like that? Oh, yes. I remember once, I'll tell you this briefly, this story, and then we'll have to take a break for our lunchtime, that in New York once I went to give a teaching, and I had this audience that I remember walking into the room and thinking, oh no. Because, you know, a Lhama does develop the ability to sort of intuit who we're talking to. And I remember walking into the room going, no. You know, because I could see that it was going to be very, very difficult. And sure enough, here we were in New York, and I was talking about the most benign, I wasn't talking about hell realms. I would never be dumb enough to talk about hell realms in New York. You guys want to hear that? You have to come to Poolsville. So anyway, I was talking about the most benign and charming, I mean, talk about white picket fence, subject that you could possibly think of. Kindness. I was talking about bodhicitta. I was talking about how, in the most fundamental way, how kindness makes one feel better. How, really, being kind to others makes one feel better. I was talking about how developing the habit of kindness brings this result, and just kindness. I was talking about bodhicitta as being consistent with our own nature. And I swear to you, not one, but on different occasions, 3 women stood up and argued with me about the validity of kindness. This one woman in particular said, this is ridiculous. Kindness has no place in my life. I mean, you have to get what you want. I don't see the point of what you're saying. This is mush. Tell me something real. That's literally what happened. So you see, that kind of person, and I remember just feeling this compassion for them, because what can the result of that be? What do you think their next experience is going to be like? Do you think they're going to fall into the lap of mother love? Do you think that kindness is going to be just heaped on them in their next life? I don't think so. I don't see how that's going to happen. So these poor people are up against the wall, and they don't even realize it. And in her haughtiness, she defended what was going to make her suffer horribly. So you see, there is that kind of thing operating in the minds of sentient beings. There are some people that categorically refuse and reject the the idea of kindness and benefiting others. And in fact, there are, it is not consistent with all of the world religions that we should take equal responsibility with ourselves as with other sentient beings. There are even types of teaching that the Buddha has taught that are meant for that kind of person who cannot appreciate compassion, who are not even set up to hear the words compassion. The Hinayana point of view, yeah, we're taught to be kind to others, but not in an aggressive way. We're taught to do no harm. That's different from saving sentient beings from suffering. And so there are sentient beings who have no capacity for kindness or generosity, you see? And so that is the result of that kind of mental state, is to be reborn as a hungry ghost, experiencing only need, only being able to experience that which comes toward oneself, literally not having the chip, the computer chip, to be able to send out. It would be like a computer that has no printer. Everything happens internally, in a way. You see what I'm saying? Nothing goes out. This person has not wired to send out anything. So, and that comes through having only the habitual tendency of self-absorption and selfishness. And the result is life as a hungry ghost. And in the hungry ghost realm, it isn't that there is no food, it is that they are so weak because of the habitual tendency of their mind, which has produced this weakness. They literally cannot, their arms and legs are like threads. They cannot get over to where the food is. They cannot get there. The only thing big about them is their stomachs, and even if they could get there, their little mouths would not be able to take in enough. Plus, it is said that even when they see food, if they can, we're not talking about seafood either, even if they do see some food, they cannot get to the food, and if they do get to the food, if they somehow manage to get to the food, it then will turn to, like a glass of water here, I have the karma for this water to refresh me. Water, a little bit of lemon, pretty good. If I were a hungry ghost in the hungry ghost realm, even if I were able to make it to that water, and I would feel the need for it very strongly, the water would be like a glass of pus or something, horrible and repulsive. Literally, something, sewage or something horrible and repulsive. It would turn to that before you reached it. And that's because of the habitual tendency of our mind. How different from sewage is the need to only satisfy oneself and not care at all for the condition of other sentient beings. To take from others and never give. How different is that than sewage? You see? So what I would like to do is, having explained very briefly the hell realms and the hungry ghost realms, then I would like to take a pause, and we'll continue, and then we'll go from that into teachings on the actual experience of dying, the bardo of dying, as opposed to the bardo of living and the bardo of becoming. We will, in order to save time and to be concise, we will talk about the difference between those three bardos, because that's where we're going to center our attention. So we'll finish up the 6 rounds and begin to talk about the bardos.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the teaching, and we hope you come back for the rest of this series, which will be on Wednesday evenings at 7:30, both on YouTube and on Facebook. We have quite a menu of things that happen on various platforms. For those of you who are comfortable on Facebook, you're familiar with the Medicine Buddha that is on every night at 7 p.m. And it's in English. It was brought out by Jetsunma, and it's a place where you can practice caring for people who are ill or, who have contracted COVID or whatever is going on in your life or in other people's lives. The practice benefits all beings. So you're welcome to put in your particular prayers, but it's also guaranteed to work for everyone. That's at 7, and that's on Facebook. On YouTube, we have meditations on Saturday and Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And those are available to everybody. They're meant for beginners, and they're led by one of our Anis or nuns. And we're happy to have you come and join us for those. There are many other practices that we do. If you go to our website, which is www.tara.org, you can find a calendar under events, and you'll be able to look at that and find various things that you might want to attend, and it will tell you how to get there. We invite you to join us. I'm going to kind of keep this short just because it was a long teaching, and I'm sure you're getting hungry after all the hungry ghost realm talk. KPC is hopefully soon to be open, but we don't know when on the inside. But the outside is always open daylight from dawn to dusk. You can meditate, walk the grounds, have your meditations near a stupa or sacred statues. There's plenty of places to find some peace and harmony, and change the energy of your life. And benefit others, because all the prayers that you make in those locations will be amplified to all beings. So we invite you there if you're in the area, and if not, when you come in the area, we invite you to come, and hopefully we'll be open by then on the inside. Meanwhile, we wish you all the best. For those of you who may want to make an offering to Jetsunma, Jetsunma's PayPal is jetsummagift@gmail.com. And you can see that in the chat, and you can use that to send her a message. Or no, sorry, that would be an offering. You could send a message too. And we hope that any other questions that you have, you can send them to us at kpc@tara.org. With all of those, we hope that gives you some food. We hope that this series of teachings will give you some comfort about the whole living and dying process, and help take away a lot of fear, and just in general help you live your life in a more conscious way. Join us. Always, you are always welcome. Thank you so much.